It's a new day, but not on Deep Space Nine. We're in the headquarters of the Cardassian Liberation Front and watching footage of a Jem'Hadar ship exploding. It's the work of saboteurs, but Kira's critiquing their performance because the people who planted the bomb did so in the wrong place. The only reason it wasn't found is because the Jem'Hadar screwed up their checks. Such teething problems are many, and Rissot, the mate of Damar Dawson-Biggs, is sick of being lectured by Kira. At least Odo can follow orders, and he goes to rest after his own successful raid. Plain Simple Garak finds him sometime later, and he looks like utter shite. They've been here for a few weeks now, and he's changed shape countless times for subterfuge. It would appear doing so causes the illness to advance more quickly. Odo asks him not to share this knowledge with Kira, and Plain Simple Garak agrees. Bashir hasn't spent those weeks doing nothing, but he might as well have. Trying to ferret out Section 31 has been a bust, so he's now working on a cure himself. O'Brien points out that's somewhat unlikely when the entire Dominion has failed, and Bashir tells him to bugger off in return. There's some conflict in Sisko's office as well. Gowron ordered Martok, husband of Sorella, on a clearly foolhardy mission and is now trying to blame him for the failure. This failure also left him in critical condition, so Sisko's speaking up on his behalf. Gowron chooses to ignore it and carry on saying Martok, husband of Sorella, is the real problem. And there's conflict in the Dominion too. Odetta Olivia Cromwell, Lord Protector of the Dominion, is in a particularly shitty mood, and she's taking it out on 8th Uncle Wayoon the Creepy. His misplaced faith in Damar Dawson-Biggs is the latest judgment against him, and she makes it very clear he'd already have been replaced if the Vorta cloning facility hadn't been kaboomed. Those responsible for the kaboom are currently discussing a very different plan of attack. The Breen power vampire gizmos are a proper pain in the balls for the Federation and Romulans, and they're going to be installed on Jem'Hadar ships too. That's why Kira wants to nick one and deliver it to the Federation. Rissot's a dick about it, but Damar Dawson-Biggs can see the benefit and agrees. When Kira draws up plans that involve Odo, Plain Simple Garak takes her to one side for a quiet chat. Despite his word, he decides to tell her about Odo's condition and how much worse it's getting, only for her to reply that she already knows. She's kept it to herself because Odo wants it that way, and she'll continue doing so until he decides otherwise. Sisko is worried. He's talking to Worf about the Gowron situation and how he's acting like a complete and utter arsehole. Worf thinks the only thing Gowron cares about right now is shaming Martok, husband of Sorella. He's popular, and that means Gowron considers him a challenger to the throne, and despite this being something Martok, husband of Sorella, has repeatedly said he doesn't want. Worf says he might have an idea for how to solve the problem, so Sisko leaves him to it. Speaking of problems, Rissot has decided he wants to be one. Taking orders from a lowly terrorist is getting on his tits, so he tries to start an argument. When she doesn't rise to the bait, he instead gets a little bit grabby and is rewarded with a few bonks on the noggin. A warning that this isn't over leaves her giving precisely 0 shits, and that's before she discovers Plain Simple Garak was watching the whole thing with a weapon drawn just in case. He gives his own warning that Rissot doesn't have the patience to wait until Cardassia's free before having another go, and she should probably give some thought to murderizing the bastard first. Back on DS9, Worf's plan is being rejected. Ironically, it involved the very thing Gowron fears, a challenge by Martok, husband of Sorella. He's not interested, not least of which because making a leadership challenge during a war is considered so gosh-darned unsporting. Speaking of unsporting, the Dominion have found Damar Dawson-Biggs' family and executed them. He wonders aloud what monsters murder families, a question Kira has an answer to. Not exactly a diplomatic response, but Plain Simple Garak thinks it might help open his eyes. If he's going to be the future of Cardassia, he needs to truly understand its past. To DS9 once more, where Worf is explaining his problem to Dax and asks her opinion. The real problem, thinks Dax, is that the entire Klingon Empire is fucked. It's filled with people who value traditions of honor, despite those traditions long being twisted by the power-hungry to shield themselves. Allowing that to continue is easier than addressing the cause for a culture with so great an emphasis on history. It's a problem even someone like Worf, the very epitome of Klingon values, refuses to acknowledge. He knows Gowron's a bag of dicks, but allows it to continue, which feels like a harsh judgment when he just tried to convince Martok, husband of Sorella, to kill the bugger, but let's ignore that for now. The bottom line is that until someone's willing to take a stand and correct the unspoken injustice, selfish men will continue to abuse a system created for those with greater principles. Our plan is underway, and we're off to nick a Jem'Hadar's ship. Problem 1 is passing off Kira, so she's now a prisoner. Problem 2 is that all Cardassian military are now disarmed upon entering Jem'Hadar's ships due to the recent unpleasantness. Still, at least we have some support, as the lad who greeted us secretly wishes Damar Dawson Biggs luck as he passes. Kira loses her restraints on the way to the bridge, and Odo stops pretending to be them before gooping off elsewhere. The Vorta in charge is a little confused about some Cardassians with a prisoner arriving on her bridge, and Plain Simple Garak says she's an important asset to interrogate. As the Vorta demands to see our orders, Odetta Olivia Cromwell, Lord Protector of the Dominion, enters the bridge as well. The Vorta's even more confused now, as she didn't know Odetta Olivia Cromwell was in the area. Being a god means you can just ignore such comments though, and she instead asks to inspect a Jem'Hadar weapon before handing it over to Plain Simple Garak. Pooping ensues, and we're left with a few corpses on the bridge as Odetta Olivia Cromwell turns back into Odo. Problem 3 is a little bigger than the first two. The special Breen energy vampire gizmo isn't actually installed yet and will take the better part of an hour to finish. Rousseau thinks that means the whole mission's a bust and we should just bugger off with the ship. The ensuing argument is interrupted by the dead Vorta receiving a phone call. Kira takes the call after disabling the camera and getting Plain Simple Garak to check the computer for the Vorta's name. The doc wants a copy of some logs, so once those are sent, Kira tells them our phone will be down for repairs over the next hour. With a little luck, we'll have already scarpered by then. Back on DS9, O'Brien's checking on Bashir. He's brought lunch to help things along, but more importantly, he's also brought an idea. Section 31 are so concerned about anybody finding a cure for the virus that, if somebody managed to do so, they'd probably send an operative to try and destroy it. Thing is, Bashir doesn't actually need to have the cure. Telling Starfleet he's found one will be enough. Bashir's impressed by the ruse and agrees. Now all they have to do is wait for and capture a super spy. We'll leave them to it and check on Worf instead. He's currently listening to Gowron's next foolhardy plan and has decided he's had enough. He calls Gowron a massive wanker who doesn't deserve to rule, and the two have a bit of a Barney. His bat'leth gets smashed early on, perhaps because he's used to a mechleth, but that just gives him 2 blades instead of 1. Gowron's stunt double, who's one of the least convincing matches I've ever seen by the way, knocks Worf on his arse and moves in for the kill, only to take both blades to the gut. Real Gowron falls over and does a dead, while Martok, husband of Sorella, calls Worf the new leader of the Klingon Empire. Not so, says Worf. He only did this because it needed doing. The job should really go to Martok, husband of Sorella, and despite protesting that he doesn't really want it either, Worf slips the cloak onto his shoulders. Things are going decidedly downhill on the Jem'Hadar ship. Odo being unable to hide his condition anymore is the last straw for Rousseau. He ignores Kira telling him to shut his cakehole and instead points a gun at her and says it's time to leave. Plain Simple Garak responds in kind, so Rousseau appeals to Damar Dawson Biggs. News that the Breen weapon has finished being installed comes in the middle of all this, so Rousseau says all Damar Dawson Biggs has to do is kill Plain Simple Garak. Then Rousseau will off Kira, and the Cardassian Liberation Front gains a ship and the new toy. With it, they can rebuild the old Cardassia together. Damar Dawson Biggs fires, and Rousseau ends up dead on the floor. He's decided the old Cardassia is no longer an option. With that taken care of, we fart knockout gas through the rest of the ship and Scarpa. Kira goes to Odo once they're underway and shushes his apologies, telling him she already knew how bad things were, so we'll leave her to comfort him as much as she can until the next part of our last adventure. We're past the halfway point in the final story arc, and that means it's time to start tying up a few of our loose threads. We've got so many different things ongoing that even a double-length episode at the end wouldn't have the time to resolve everything, so we need to start picking off any subplot that'll support the main stories. Today's mascot is the Phoenix, as death and rebirth are the themes for our chosen threads. Gowron is a representation of Cardassia past. He considers the occupation of Bajor to be the halcyon days of a golden age. He's not offended by subjugation or oppression per se, he's just offended that the Dominion are doing it to them. Basically, he's a stereotypical nostalgia wanker who views history through a very selective lens and has compartmentalized the actions of his own people, and him personally, as completely different to what the Dominion are doing now. There's no introspection here, no analysis of his own history. Bajor deserved it, Cardassia doesn't. It's that simple. The difference between Damar Dawson Biggs and Gowron is, ultimately, the difference between patriotism as a goal and patriotism as an excuse. Rasot's idea of what's best for Cardassia is one that just happens to coincide with the time when he was at the height of his personal power. He might even have actually convinced himself he's doing it for others, and his own gains would be pure coincidence. But the two are most definitely linked in his mind. When he tries to convince Damar Dawson Biggs to his side, he says they can lead their people to greatness again. Lead them to greatness, not free them from oppression. His priorities are clear. Damar Dawson Biggs, on the other hand, genuinely wants what's best for Cardassia, and he won't let himself get in the way of that. This has led him to do some deeply questionable shit in the past, but he genuinely believed those choices were what's best for his people, not himself. You don't off your boss's daughter if you're looking for a promotion. And it's that willingness to put aside his own ego that allows him to be a civic patriot in the truest sense, one who places the long-term good of the people over short-term gains or personal interest, one who understands that refusing to acknowledge the errors of the past or the present stymies any growth connected to them. Damar Dawson Biggs has come to understand that patriotism is not wanting what was or what is, it's wanting what should be. And we see a similar situation repeated in Worf as well. Dax's brutally honest analysis of the Klingon Empire as a noble idea subverted by bastards is one that he simply cannot deny. His unthinking adherence to flawed cultural norms in the name of patriotism isn't really that far removed from the past actions of Damar Dawson Biggs, and just like him, a little bit of external nudging helps him accept it. The result of that nudging also means we lose a fan favourite of the show. Gowron, the stariest Klingon ever to have lived, has had a literal belly full of fighting and shuffled his scheming arse off to Grethor with all the other dickheads. With his death, the Klingon Empire passes on to Martok, husband of Sorella, and Sisko can stop worrying about it. He was so worried, in fact, that his actions in today's episode give us a little something to think about. When discussing the matter with Worf, he provides the lines, "Something has to be done, and do whatever it takes, Mr. Worf." The problem is that, depending on which way you want to interpret those comments, they might constitute a prime directive violation. We've seen before that the PD covers unwanted interference in the politics of non-Federation species. We had an admiral spell it out for us in Season 2 when he said any interference in a potential Bajoran civil war, even to prevent it being provoked by the Cardigans, is a prime directive matter. If we're not allowed to prevent regime change, then we're sure as shit not allowed to provoke it. The counterpoint to that, of course, is that Worf is Klingon. It's his species, even if it's not necessarily entirely his culture, due to being raised by humans. Does Starfleet membership and adopting its oaths disenfranchise him from his people? Taking that thought one step further, does a member of an unaffiliated species being accepted into Starfleet constitute a prime directive violation in and of itself? Non-interference in the natural development of a species is a central tenet of the rule. Injecting Starfleet principles into someone and then letting them loose back into their own species after we're done feels like a pretty good example of unnatural development. All of which might sound like I'm knocking the show or Trek as a whole, but I'm really not. I've been wanting to make a video focusing on the Prime Directive for a while, but until I get the chance to do so, we'll summarise it here by saying lofty ideals are a good thing, provided they're matched with a little pragmatism on their application. Whenever I've pointed out in one of these videos that something technically breaks the Prime Directive, I'm not necessarily calling it wrong. Sometimes I'm highlighting that the Prime Directive, when applied strictly upon its fundamental principles of zero interference, is completely unworkable unless you withdraw entirely from the galactic community at large. Even the simple act of trade is one that has the potential to pollute the culture you're trading with. There's a reason why we've never seen the Prime Directive fully written down, and that reason is because any such text attempting to cover all eventualities would be so labyrinthine, so filled with rules, amendments, clauses and exclusions, that it would be both constantly changing and so utterly impenetrable as to be worthless. That does not make the initial idea wrong. It just means that, like so many things in life, understanding the principle is more important than learning the words. We've another belated entry into the Babylon 5 crossover club before we finish. Luaran the Vorta was played by Kitty Swink, who we've previously seen back in Season 2, before I was keeping track of these things. She's also married to Armin Shimmerman, by the way. As to Babylon 5, she played a senator in the first episode of Season 3, Matters of Honor. End of episode.
Have you been thinking about how we're going to escape the internet?
I have, yes. Well, go on then. Look, do I really have to? I like this story. Stories end, son. We can't have new ones if they don't. But I want to be in more of them.
Nobody's saying you can't do the occasional cameo in the future. That's fan service, which means it's allowed.
Yeah, you can be the Jeffrey Combs of the end bits or some shite. Do you mean it this time, or will you just do what you did to the artist formerly known as Dancing Baby?
Hey, we've never actually confirmed what happened to him. He could come back at any time.
Besides which, he wanted to be a new main character. You just want the occasional guest bit. That feels reasonable to me. Well, all right then. I'll tell you some of the ways you can exit.
You might want to keep the options to a minimum. We've only got 3 videos left. Slightly urgent Worf.